So, 10
Claire.
seconds, then up to 15, then up to 20, or whatever, It's math, so you're not going to do it for very long.
Brilliant. Okay, Claire, what is tip number 2 that you've got for us today, please?
So tip number 2, it's interesting because you want 5 tips, don't you? And I did a piece for the teachers here, and I talked about my 5 sort of planks of quality of education. So that's quite good. You want 5, and these are basically the 5 that I've told them. So that works really well for me. And one of the things I say, so this is going to sort of span sort of 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5, is that we should teach well and teach securely and teach for recall and teach for the long term. So anyway, so number 2 is to teach well, but I mean, obviously that's not really a tip. Hey, teach well. So, but under that rubric is be super clear about what you want children to learn. Really super clear, much clearer than you think you need to be. So think about what's tricky. What are you assuming they already know? Break it down into steps, and then get each step and break that down into steps, and then get each step and think, can I break it down more? Because we have the curse of the expert, and it seems so obvious to us. So let's have an example. So where does this usually go wrong? How can I preempt that? How can I be proactive? So let's take the example of fractions, since you're a maths teacher. And, say you want them to add fractions. Well, let's think about that. Have we thought about, when we say add fractions, do we mean adding fractions with the same denominator or different denominators? Do we mean the same numerator? And let's be really super clear about what exactly it is. Okay, say we're going to say, all right, no, actually, we're going to start off with the same denominator. Fine. What does denominator actually mean? And this is where just giving them a definition won't particularly help. I mean, maybe along the line we can, but it's too the definition's harder than the concept, frankly. So, and when you think about denominators, the key things are they're not natural numbers. I mean, I wouldn't use this language with kids, but for us to understand, they're not natural numbers; they're rational numbers. That's why kids find them hard, because they all the way along they've learned that 1 more goes up in value by 1, and now we come to some other numbers where that doesn't work. Of course that's going to confuse them, of course it is. They've been brainwashed in that for 7 or 8 years when we first start doing that, and all of a sudden we go, no, it doesn't work like that. Well, they're going to find that really confusing, because it's completely going, oh no, now it doesn't work like that. Well, that's because it's not, they're rational numbers, they're not the same, so we have to make a big really preempt the fact they're going to find that hard. And so there's that, but there's also this whole thing about the word whole. We haven't, you've got a little kid, haven't you? We don't go 1, 2, 3. Oh, 3's a whole number. We don't say, by the way, these things you're talking about, they're whole numbers. We just all of a sudden start going, oh yeah, wholes. And of course, there's also whole, like a hole in the ground, so that's confusing anyway. But whole, what does that mean? A whole number? And we're going to go a big thing about what we mean by a whole number. So all the numbers we've been talking about before, they were whole, but sometimes things aren't whole numbers. And your kid, he probably, how old is he now?
3.
But does he go, I'm 3.5? They do go, I'm 3 and 2. Yeah. They do like that sort of label. So they do sort of know that. They do sort of know, I've got half a biscuit or something like that. They sort of know something about that. But making a big deal, and this can be, kids who are 13 might not quite have ever got that, and we just assume they have. But what do we mean by a whole number, and what's not a whole number? So really being super, super clear. And then also in fractions, a whole what? Because sometimes we think a whole and we just assume it's 1. But of course we know in fractions it's not always 1. And sometimes a whole, and then we talk about, there's whole numbers, but there's also the whole of a fraction. So we go, when you talk definitions of fractions, you go, oh, what's the whole? But a whole doesn't have to be 1, does it? So you might say, and a whole doesn't even have to be a whole number. It's really complicated. You might say, what's 2/3 of a quarter? Well, what's the whole? And the whole's a quarter, but a quarter isn't a whole number. It's confusing. So unless you know how confusing it is and have really thought about that, then it will all unravel quite quickly. So what is a whole number? And just the basics, fraction. What does fraction mean? Fraction, it comes from Latin. It's about breaking something. So here's a number, like number 2, and we can break it into pieces. There we are. Or we usually call them parts rather than pieces in maths, for whatever reason. But look, and then, so you've got the idea of a whole, you've got the idea of parts, but then, and this is really key, kids don't necessarily know what an equal part is, because they think equals means here comes the answer, and some kids will really struggle with that, and they really don't get what an equal part is or equal group. So these numbers, and each is a key number in maths that you really need to understand. And believe me, I've had kids of 11 or 12 or something who don't really get each. I mean, not most kids are fine, but some kids don't get whole, don't get each, and don't get equal. So unless you preempt all of that and have really thought about it and really done stuff to preempt that, you will get into trouble. So preempt it, really know what you'll be super clear about what you want to teach. I've just used fractions as an example. It could be in English, or it could be about what is a sentence. People go crazy because kids are like, why are you using full stops? Well, probably because they don't know what a sentence is. Like, they don't really understand what a sentence is, and it's quite a tricky concept, actually. So you need to do lots of, and I should have said this for fractions as well, examples, but also non-examples. So here's I've divided this into two pieces. This is equal groups, this is not equal groups. You know, examples, non-examples. This is a sentence, this is not a sentence. So it's a fragment, so it's not yet a sentence. We need to add more words before it becomes a sentence. So identifying misconceptions, examples and non-examples. In sentences, some kids don't realise that, you know, he ran is a sentence because they have the misconception that sentences have to have quite a lot of words, and like 2 isn't enough. So be super clear about what you're going to teach. That is tip number 2.
Right, let's dig into this a little bit. First thing to say is I love it. Second thing to say is I often say when I'm speaking to primary colleagues, you could not pay me to be a primary teacher. And I'm discovering this now, as I say, with my little boy. Like, trying to get my head around numbers. I remember when I spoke to Helen Williams on my Mr. Bart Maths podcast, we had a big discussion about what is 3. And I'm well, just 1, 2, 3. And she's, yeah, but it could be counting. It's the concept of threeness. I'm like, oh my God, like, don't get me started. Oh, but then, as you say, you're now talking about fractions. And I say fortunately, like, luckily, when I teach students in year 7, they've got, you know, a decent awareness of something like fractions. But to start that from square one, flipping heck, as you say, thinking about wholes, each, equal parts, and so on. But this will be true for any concept that secondary college teachers, you know,
and I bet you have
it's
some
the same
secondary
principle.
Kids who haven't really got those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are sort of flying under the radar. They might have some things that are fine, that are sort of at an appropriate level, but somewhere underneath there's some really basic concepts that are really shaky, like place value. My husband used to be, he's retired now, a maths intervention teacher for younger kids, mainly primary age kids, and he did this sort of bit of research on language and about place value, and kids didn't understand value. Well, you know, value means cheap in supermarkets, doesn't it? So, you know, but place, didn't understand place either. So, like, or column. He was like, oh God, this is so complicated.
So it's a nightmare. So I guess my question is, because this curse of knowledge is obviously an absolute, you know, disaster waiting to happen. This for many teachers. Well, how do you find practically you can do this? So talking about your fraction example there, which I think is a really nice one. How can teachers do that for any concept they're teaching? Is it a case of, you know, write out the solution to a problem and then try and think how they know how to get from line 1 to line 2? Or are there different strategies? What's the practical way to do this?
Right at the beginning, if you think about where does, I mean, obviously it doesn't work if you're a brand new teacher because you won't know, but if you've been teaching a while, where does it always go wrong? Like, we know fractions always goes wrong because people don't understand what a denominator is, and therefore that's why they add different denominators, because they don't really understand that. And then you think, well, why don't they understand that? What is it? And it's not just, well, I've told them they can't do it, so they need to understand why it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work, and this is tricky, because I mean, we're probably not going to use the language of natural and rational number, but it is actually a number. You know, it's not actually a number in like a common or garden number, how those of us who aren't maths teachers would think about it. It's not referring to a quantity, is it, really? It's to a ratio. And that means it operates differently. So therefore we have to unpick that. And then to unpick, you know, what we're actually getting at is about when we're dividing something, and that's get to the whole. So what is this something that we're dividing? And we use the word whole in a rather cavalier fashion. And we're dividing it. All right, kids generally get dividing, but we're dividing it equally. okay? And I don't know why kids, because you think, fairness and things like that, but honestly, that's a real stumbling block for kids. And they really do need to see the examples, not examples. So I think it's like backward thinking from where does it go wrong, and why is it going wrong? And if you can, I think, try and explain it. Like if you're a maths teacher, go and get, I don't know, a French teacher or someone and go, let me teach you fractions. Like, do you find fractions hard? Or your partner or somebody who's the maths teacher. Like, or somebody who doesn't know this stuff as well as you do. Do you find this hard at school? Let me explain it to you. And like be brutally honest. Like, don't do that glazing eyes where you start going, yeah, I understand if you don't. Like, tell me. It's really worth doing. It's really, really worth going, especially if you know what are the things that always go wrong? Fractions always goes wrong. Negative numbers always goes wrong. Sentences always goes wrong. Tenses in languages always go wrong. In English, for that matter, as well, always go wrong. Just find out what those things are, and then spend a lot of time unpicking why, and then proactively teach for it.
Right, let me ask you one more, and it's a terrible question, this, Claire. Let me just ask you one more follow-up to this. Let's imagine you're a brand new teacher, so you've no experience to fall back on, and for whatever reason, you've got no mates, you've got no supportive partner who you can teach fractions to. What are you going to do there? How can kind of novice teachers give themselves the best chance of doing this? Obviously, your school will have a brilliant curriculum that will have preempted that all for you, but I suppose you're saying that doesn't happen either. You still have to just break it down. Now, like, break it into steps, break each step into steps, and then think, well, surely there's nothing more to know. 3 is 3. It's like, no, there's more to know. Like, break it down until it's ridiculous, and then think, oh, okay. It's hard, isn't it? Because I do a lot of talking about, some people call this atomization or whatever label you want to put on it. And the kickback you always get from teachers is, well, I don't have time. Like, if you want me to break it down this much, I'm never going to actually get to teach the thing because I'm going to be spending all my time doing each of these minor components. Well, what's your response to something like that?
It's like, well, do you want to teach it or do you want them to learn it? And I will get into this when I go to robust culture of retrieval, which was tip number 5. It's like, the key is that the kids learn it, not that you get to the end and go, well, I've taught it now. Stupid kids didn't learn it. It's all their fault. So, like, it's not just about you getting to the end of a course. It's about them actually learning it. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And actually, in PISA, the big international assessment, the Japanese kids so they take it at 15. So in the maths, they only do something like 2/3 of, I can't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4. Anyway, not all. I think it's 3/4. Anyway, a fraction that's greater than half of the syllabus. They haven't taught it all by the time they do the test, and yet they come 3rd in the world. And so even though there's like a quarter of it, or is it whatever, that they haven't done, they ace it and do much better than everywhere else because what they have learned, they know really securely.
Got it.